This Fed Gov Today program is sponsored by Maximus. On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, financial management moves to get the most out of your agency's budget, the business collaboration model that'll move the contracting needle, and building back the government-vendor relationship. Welcome to Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. The White House says the Pentagon and the Office of Management and Budget can reprogram whatever money they need to pay troops while the government is shut down. Politico reports the agency should use, quote, any funds left over from fiscal year 2025. Danny Werfel is executive in residence at the Johns Hopkins School of Government and Public Policy. He's former commissioner of the IRS and former controller at OMB. Danny, welcome. Thanks for joining me. It's great to have you here. What resources do financial managers have to move money around, and what's really an explicit no-no during a shutdown?
Well, there's not a lot. Once the appropriations lapse, you're really constrained from what we call creating new budget authority, assuming that you have new money to use. So no new obligations for contracts or grants. But there are sources of money that you can spend, and there's a couple of examples, like prior year money or multi-year money, or what's sometimes called no-year money, where it's not tied to this year's appropriation. You can also use fee-funded activities. There are these things called franchise funds, which again are funded not dependent on congressional appropriations, but other government receipts. And then there's reprogramming. You can, in certain situations, take money from one account to another to fund an activity, but there's a lot of limits on that. It's not open-ended, and so there's a lot of law and analysis that needs to go into whether you're going to reprogram or not. At OMB, when I was there and we were running Shutdown, we certainly allowed reprogramming, but not creative reprogramming.
What's the difference between allowable reprogramming and creative reprogramming in your view?
First of all, there needs to be a legal basis and authority that exists for the programming. So you start, that's prong one. And prong two is really that it's used for the same purpose, right? So if you have money that was originally programmed for technology or technology infrastructure, and now you want to use it for payroll, you may not be able to, because the original law that authorized and appropriated those funds, even if they're from last year or they're multi-year funds, were for one purpose. And when you use it for a cross purpose, then you get into a potential Anti-Deficiency Act violation. And so it's incumbent upon OMB to establish the parameters for when you can and can't reprogram.
So you touched on a word there that might be the most important one of all, and that is authorization. A lot of people lose sight of the fact that all federal money is both authorized and appropriated, and I think during a shutdown, a lot of people focus on the appropriations part and not so much on the authorization part.
Yeah, and those laws, it's like the one grabs the baton from the other, establish the parameters for how long you can spend the money for, how much you can spend, and what you can spend it on. And so when you're in a shutdown, it becomes even more constrained in terms of the degrees of freedom. And a lot of it, it's just a complete no-fly zone. You're not allowed to spend it at all. And that's why you see government operations suspended in so many different places during a shutdown. The other really interesting thing about a shutdown is that it evolves. Our agencies across government have their shutdown plans. And your shutdown plan lays out what you're going to keep open and what you're going to keep closed. And there's this whole part of what you keep open because there might be a threat or risk to life or property. And so you exempt those activities and keep them open. But that shifts over time. What might not be a risk on day one of the shutdown might become a risk on day 20 of the shutdown. And so there's an expectation also that not a lot of people realize is that these shutdown plans can be fluid. And so there's so much complexity. Can I reprogram for a different purpose? Generally, no. But can I update my shutdown plan as the environment changes and risks change? Yes.
Did you find when you were running the shutdown 2013 that risk framework changed during the shutdown, that you had to alter those shutdown plans as they evolved?
I was actually IRS commissioner at the time, so we were running the operation, and we had about 2/3 of the agency furloughed, but we had a responsibility to preserve against cyber threats. We had to preserve remittances and other things. And as the days unfolded, we were shifting who was furloughed and who wasn't around this idea of we have to protect life or property, including government property. And so these things do evolve. Shutdowns are messy. They should always be avoided. That's my first wish and hope, is that we don't ever get to a shutdown. It wasn't intended. It's not the way you would design the railroad to be run.
Yeah.
And so you have all these gray areas. Can these funds be reprogrammed for this purpose? How does your shutdown plan evolve? All of it is in a gray area, and hopefully what happens is the Government Accountability Office will come in after each shutdown and evaluate whether, certain rules were bent too far or not, and hopefully we can get smarter and smarter about future shutdowns. But if it were up to me, no shutdowns.
No shutdowns ever
Yeah.
again. You mentioned three kinds of money: prior year money, multi-year money, and no-year money. Do all agencies have those to consider, or are those peculiar to certain types of missions or certain types of organizations?
It's peculiar, and it's peculiar within organizations, but it's prior year money. We had leftover and we were allowed to roll it over because it was authorized for multiple year use. So I don't have to spend it all by the end of the fiscal year. You also have these working capital funds where, for example, at GSA, they're collecting rent receipts from all the federal agencies each year, and they can reuse that money. They don't have to go back to Congress to get money appropriated. So if there's extra money in the working capital fund at GSA, they can use it even during a shutdown, but they can't use it for any purpose. So if the purpose of that money is to maintain federal facilities, great, you can use it for that purpose. But you then might not be able to go buy laptops with it because that's a different purpose. And that goes back to this question that I think many people will have as the current administration starts to repurpose money for different uses. Have they colored within the right lines? And again, there's so much gray area. We don't know the actual answer. Maybe the courts could decide. Who knows? My reliance typically is on the Government Accountability Office to come in after the fact and do a vetting and hopefully get everyone smarter about what the right lines are to color and color outside of.
It's great to have you on the show as always, Danny.
Always
Thank
good
you
to
very
be
much.
here.
You can read more about financial management during the shutdown on today's show page